Excellent. Well, I see Stefan has begun the recording. So, Joe, over to you.
There we go.
Bingo.
Hear you loud.
Right on. Okay, good. Okay, so our topic today is doing big things with DITA. Our DITA goes mainstream, and really the origin of this is basically prompted by the appearance of Adobe's documentation add-in, so a DITA CCMS that leverages the Adobe Experience Manager, and many of my customers have AEM as an infrastructure component. It's something that is broadly available, and so we're going to talk about a few things about why I'm so excited about this and why I can't get Facebook to stop giving me notifications. Back to my story, I was really very excited about the potential to leverage the Adobe Experience Manager as a working platform, and to really use that to extend the reach of our DITA work in many of these organizations, and so to burst out. Finally, we can break out and go mainstream. So really this talk is to share with you part of that excitement, but it's also to look at really the reasons why I find it so exciting and why I think now is the time for DITA. So, again, Joe Gollner from Gnostics Research here in Ottawa, Canada, where no, we do not have snow yet, but it won't be long. So hopefully both audio and visual is working along. Here are the topics I'd like to cover in this session. One is, back to the changing of gears, I'd like to have us all step back and think like an architect. Let's think about DITA. Let's think about the tools that we have available. Let's think about our work as communicators as an architect would, about how we fit in. I'd like to then review some of the basic building blocks, sort of, to be honest, my way of viewing things, which will then help explain why I see certain types of persistent content challenges. And when I say persistent, I mean problems that I have been encountering and wrestling with for upwards of, and it's sad to admit, 30 years. Then we're going to get to talking about, well, here comes DITA. Although, DITA has even been with us for a good long time now, 12 years plus, and we can say, well, what is it we see in DITA that got us excited in the beginning and is still getting us a bit excited? And then we're going to look at a couple of case studies, particularly very large institutions where this combination of, we'll call it true content management, DITA-enabled content management with something like the Adobe Experience Manager, if you put them together, wow, you can really do something magnificent. And the closing case study is one of my current projects, long-standing projects with the Canadian government, and how I see this combination is going to let us solve just a complete long laundry list of problems which over the last 20 years, for argument's sake, we've not been able to fix. So, charging right in, thinking like an architect. So here we have the architect from the Matrix. I guess Matrix Reloaded. Anyway, it means stepping back and thinking about the big picture for a minute. And so it's moving back from some of the details, which may well have been covered in some of the sessions you've seen so far, and thinking about what's the big picture. What are we doing? How are things going to change in the future? Perhaps the near future, certainly the long term, and how do we position what we do as communicators, perhaps as DITA practitioners, as content technology specialists? How do we position what we do in the larger landscape of what your enterprise does? And these are important things to come back to every once in a while, because whether you're a technical writer that's new to the team, or you're an illustrator, or you're a content strategist, or you're a team leader, or you're a consultant, if you are working inside the confines of an enterprise, some point in every day you will typically have to explain to someone what it is you're up to and why that's important. depending on how hard your day is, that maybe explain it to yourself, but hopefully each day goes well. So let's sort of cover off some of the building blocks. So as I say here, we do want to get onto the same page. And when I use certain terms, it's sort of perhaps good for us all to know what it is that Joe's talking about right now. So right away, I have a very particular way of defining content. And I find that it is a tremendously powerful way of defining content. So cut right to the chase, content is potential information. It's what we plan, design, create, reuse, manage, so that we can deliver effective information experiences, effective information transactions. So that means, the content is something we fashion and have ready to go, but it's then going to be activated and turned into an event, turned into an action that then we're going to refresh a page. We're going to deliver a parcel of data to an app. We're going to print a page. Whatever the action is, it's going to draw upon content assets that we have prepared and have managed. So we talk about publishing as taking us from content assets that are pure potential and publishing them into a product. Whether it be a book, a set of change pages, a message, a post to social media, whatever it is. And it sounds kind of obtuse or overly refined, but to be honest, as a solution architect, making this distinction solves a whole mountain of problems, because then you can say certain things are solved when we are preparing and managing the content, and others are a delivery question. And if we can split things up that way, we can really simplify our lives. And this is a good thing. And I'm not, this definition that I use is not at all strange. In fact, it is rigorously based on theories in either philosophy or linguistics or computer science. It even goes back to the basic meaning of the word content as it's taken from Latin, meaning that which is contained. So the content is what we've prepared as an asset. The information takes that, or a subset of that, and delivers it to a particular person at a particular street corner with a particular device and says, that's exactly what you need to make a good choice or make a wise decision. So that's quite a refined, but it's sort of, you'll see, underlies the problems that I'm going to highlight. Now, content, again, even as we just saw in the previous presentation, content is a complex artifact. It's a composite. It's built up from many pieces, and once it's assembled, it's extremely high value. So what do I mean by that? I said, well, okay, on the left in the red, the red circles are, on a conceptual level, content is made up of a whole bunch of things that we want to achieve, of audiences we want to speak to, of sources of expertise, of data sources. But basically, it all comes together and says, here's the message we're trying to convey. Here's what actions we'd like our audiences to take. Here's what we've learned from those audiences when we get feedback and how we've rolled that into our messaging. That it's all these things. And that's why, as I mentioned here, why being a communicator is such hard work. Working with content is tough. Physically also, for those of us who manage content as a physical asset, it's a tough object to look after. Why? Because, again, it is complicated. We have text, we have links, relationships, we have data sets, we have media. They could be images, sound files, video, animation, visualizations that dynamically render based on the data that's available, metadata that tells us about the content asset and says where does it make sense to show this, and rules, including perhaps even rendition rules, but certainly validation rules. So all of these things come together and say this is a content artifact. I talk about this because I often deal with large organizations and their information technology groups, their chief information officers, their chief technology officers, and I have to say, well, you can't just treat data or treat content as a form of data that you just haven't created the perfect database for. Content is a composite artifact. These things are tightly wound together. The data, for example, is mixed with, I call them rhetorical structures, the ways that we write, the way we even lay things out, or the way we add supplemental media, all designed to influence people's behavior. And when we talk about rhetoric, we're basically talking about convincing people to do stuff. So content is special. And so we have to be very, very careful and very, very conscious about how we handle content, how we plan it, how we design it, how we manage it, so that we don't diminish its fundamental and its unique quality. Now, all this, if you are communicators out there, this is a good news, I believe, because it helps us explain that what we do is unique. We pull all these things together for our organization and turn it into a high value asset that somebody who's trying to perform a task, to learn how to use a new feature or to fix a piece of equipment, that if it all comes together, they're going to do it quickly and efficiently and safely, and they're going to leave with a positive feel towards your brand, or maybe you're a government agency that uses the equipment to deliver a service. You're going to feel that the tools and the items and the informations that you have been using are helping you do a better job. So if we understand that content is this, this potential information that is it's a complex composite artifact, all these things pulled together, when we think, well, what kind of life cycle? Where does this type of material come from? How does it get leveraged? Well, in my world, I have a 4 core content activities that are always operating on our content assets. And just quickly we'll run through them. One is content acquisition, which boils down to how do I get my hands on it? Where does it come from? So maybe it's what I design and create. As we say, we plan it out and we say we need these tasks, we need these descriptions, and it's assigned to writers to prepare and illustrators to add artwork. Whatever it is, that's sort of the design and create. But it could be that we say, well, this material is actually best sourced from legacy materials. It's converted, maybe from Word files, maybe from wherever it used to be. I've had projects where we've converted things from old Wang word processors, which sounds kind of ridiculous, but for certain types of physical equipment systems, particularly like military systems, oftentimes the best data you have, the best materials you have, were written back, say, 20, 30 years ago. So yes, your best acquisition step is to convert. Or perhaps you should do neither of those things and you license it from a third party. Someone else has the right content that you need. Anyway, so it really is agnostic of which path you take, but you have to get your hands on the content you need. Then, with that in hand, you then say, well, how do I deliver it? How do I need to give it to somebody? How do I produce those information experiences, those transactions, those events? So basically that's publishing. I grab the right pieces, I render it in the form that's desirable for that particular channel, and I push it. I deliver it in whatever way is expeditious, that people will work for the people who are involved. So those 2 top ones are like the most visible ones. How do we acquire the content and how do we deliver it? The bottom part of this diagram, we see questions of how do we manage the content. So now I've got those assets and I've got the processes that operate on those assets. How do I manage all this? So in this particular lifecycle model, I have demoted content management to not being everything. It's not sort of life, the universe, and everything as we would see. But it is, or that we often see, it's actually said it is a supporting activity. It is a peer to acquisition and delivery. It basically is a facilitator. And I do that in part because I wanted to prevent people and certain past practices of overemphasizing the management side and spending a lot of money on management controls and not giving equal time to, say, delivering new and interesting information experiences with those content investments. So historically, I've criticized a lot of projects for really over-investing in the content management, but not delivering anything of compelling value or new use. And it's one of my points about these kind of activities is that we need to make a balance between them because they are profoundly interdependent. And any project that you find that's overinvested in one of these activities and not have sort of balancing investments in the others invariably comes unstuck. It runs into problems. Now, the last of the activities on this slide is content engagement. And to my knowledge, it's my content lifecycle is the only one that has this fourth element that says with acquisition and delivery working and a management activity, sort of keeping everything under control, then the other piece is how do I improve the content? How are my stakeholders, my users, engaged in the process of improving the content? So partly this is being attentive to what people are doing, learning from user metrics, it's learning from user feedback. It's learning from statistics, for example, on user task success. It really is about using a listening device to drive the evolution of the content. So those are my four core activities. There is a fifth element, which is the often encountered phrase content strategy. When I first started to think about content strategy back several years ago, it was really just thinking about, well, in what way is content strategy a useful idea? And of course, as I looked at it in the context of a content lifecycle, it made perfectly good sense. So we'll start with content. If we're going to define content strategy, we have to then define strategy. And strategy is quite simply defined as a plan of action. It's like, these are the things we're going to do. Why? Because we're directing those activities towards achieving a longer term goal. It's sort of mobilizing the assets that we have in an organization and saying, here's what we can draw upon, here's what we're going to invest in, and here's what we're going to achieve. So as I summarize here, a content strategy kind of sits in the middle as a coordinator of action. And it says, here's the plan of action. It is centered on what content is needed and why. It establishes then the need for change, saying, we're going to have to modify how we acquire content because our content strategy is telling us we need to deliver content through a new channel. Or we have, our users would benefit from a completely new type of information product, a new type of information experience. And that's only going to happen if we acquire some different content, or if we acquire the content that we have been historically, but do so differently, perhaps with greater precision, in a format that's going to lend itself to delivering what's needed. So really, a content strategy will very quickly determine what needs to change. What are we doing today that we really should move on from? Also, and what I've found is typically missed in discussions of content strategy is a plan of action really doesn't count for much unless it is associated with a measurement framework. Like, how do we know we are moving ahead? So if you go and take as I have, if you go and take courses on corporate strategy, for example, you find that you spend most of your time talking about performance metrics, key performance indicators. Like, how do you know that your plan of action is actually taking hold, that you're actually making progress against the targets you've set? And typically you will have higher level stakeholders, boards of governors or board of directors, or in the government you will have some higher level of oversight within the government that's really checking in on, are you doing what you're supposed to be doing given the funds that we've given you? And you really have to have good answers to that, and that's why strategies always come with here's the plan and here's how we're going to measure the milestones. So we know that in 6 months, we should achieve this new metric that measures the level of content engagement among a certain class of users. And then you can say, report back saying, yes, we hit that, or we fell short, but here's what we learned. Strategy really turns very quickly to discussions of measurement. And measurement is of course a big subject all on its own, and it can be easily abused, it can be easily confused with action. And so you really do have to be clear-headed in how you use measurement. But if it's used well, it can be profoundly effective. I had one customer I just visited a couple weeks ago, and we'd implemented a DITA content management and publishing environment for them a couple years ago. So I had just a friendly follow-up visit with them. And interestingly, because we had put in place some measurement frameworks and we tracked a variety of things, and they were able to sort of create management reports based on those metrics, a change in management and a great deal of turbulence in the company in terms of their marketplace meant that they really didn't face any problems at all, because they were able to talk to management in a way that management was used to being talked to, and that they welcomed. So as long as they hit certain indicators, they were given the funds that they wanted. They were given additional personnel. They were left alone. And this was really quite striking, because other parts of the organization had received a great deal of stress and reductions and budget pressure. So sometimes measurements and metrics really do pay off. So we can talk about now saying, okay, on the left hand of this illustration, we see an evolution cycle. We have our 4 content activities of content acquisition, delivery, management, and engagement. We have content strategy as sort of like the little engine the little engine that's sort of pushing it along. But then we see to the right-hand side why things are moving forward. That from content delivery, we produce information products. That's when we publish information products. And we produce all sorts of them. And each one of those information products will be associated with a great number of user tasks. And so in effect, we are pushing out guidance of them. Perhaps we're trying to help people buy our product. Perhaps we're trying to help people fix our product. Perhaps we're just use our product, customize it, whatever it is. We are providing some form of guidance, rhetorical encouragement. And what we see here, in mathematics, we would say we have a double feedback. We have a very complex situation in the technical sense of the word complex, because, to really know if we're doing a good content job, we have to measure the quality of the information products we are producing. And to measure that, we actually then go a step further to measure the user task, the user task success. Are people doing a better job at the tasks that we would like them to do, or that they see themselves as needing to do? So a user task could be everything from how quickly they can find something through to how quickly they can diagnose a problem, how quickly they can fix a problem once it's been identified. So all of this data that we collect about user task success then piles back onto information products, which in turn comes back into our content activities through content engagement. It's where we're learning, where we're listening to how is the content being used. So this is a very complex situation. What we see is, as communicators, we'll be working on the left-hand side, collaborating on our strategy, designing and preparing content assets, working with the sort of a layout team and a publishing process team to say, this is what we're going to do with that. We're doing all that work, but it's actually over on the other side of the wall that we are really learning about whether or not what we've been doing succeeds or not. And so this is one of the challenges we have. This gets us, of course, to persistent content challenges. I think it's next year I cross the line of sort of having worked in the content business for 30 years, when I became involved in some academic projects that were looking at the application of SGML to literary texts and historical materials. But that's a separate topic. Anyway, let's talk about what do we learned over those years. what are the problems that we've had that just don't go away? So we're going to go back to the 80s. And, in the beginning, the content work in the good old days. So I'm just old enough to remember exactly these days. I do personally remember working in an office, I guess starting in 1989 when I left academia, where we had a typing pool. And certain types of our documentation items would go off to a typesetter and come back in a very, very strictly controlled print layout. It was also the time when desktop publishing tools had appeared and were sort of proliferating through our office because it was a way to sort of streamline some of those activities. Now, what is important in this illustration is that the work of an author, for example, and a publisher were, well, I call it simple, direct, and expensive. For authors, it was by and large a pretty good time because we had direct line of sight as we worked on basically how the publication would look when we're done, because we had typically one type of publication and we knew exactly what it was supposed to look like. This was the era where we had very, very tightly specified print specifications, where we knew every rule. We knew what orphan control would be applied. We knew how warnings would be handled as pages broke, or we knew how tables would be split. We had a rule for everything. So we had a very physical sense for how the content was going to look. The publishing side, again, it was pretty simple, but we did tend to spend a lot of money, whether we were sending it off for typesetting or if we had a team. Let's say our typing pool started to include more people working on desktop publishing tools to produce various deliverables. Then, starting in the mid-'80s and picking up steam as we moved into the '90s, we had the era of SGML, the Standard Generalized Markup Language, and what I call the birth of content technologies. And when we look into those publishing groups, what we see is that we sort of changed the experience where we introduced a publishing system. And now the author was interacting with a publishing system. And invariably that involved tagging, the introduction of angle brackets and elements and attributes and rules on the structure of document content. And we could, when it was well used, we could do magnificent things with SGML. And I personally, as a confession, I kind of miss it, simply because SGML gave us a great deal of control and ability to sort of adapt to what I see as the real texture and landscape of content. But it is true to say that for authors, these kind of SGML publishing systems introduced a more abstract, a more formal authoring experience, and one where there was a greater distance between what the author was working on and what the end publication would look like. And particularly in this diagram, we said, well, many organizations decided, well, rather than having an in-house publishing system, we're going to outsource it. And therefore, the interaction, the author basically contributes content, it goes away, and proofs come back. And there was just a movement towards a greater distance between the author and the experience that they're trying to support with their content. And this meant, and the diagram tries to convey it, is that the systems became more complex. Starting in 1996 and really picking up steam with 1998, we see the era of XML, the extensible markup language, and what I call the rebirth of content technologies, and in particular the declared intention of XML was to bring our content technologies, bring our document markup language, SGML, into a tighter alignment with web technologies. There's a little irony in there because, of course, the core web technology, the web feature was the HTML, the hypertext markup language for web pages, which was itself an SGML application. But anyway, what we did see with XML, because now with XML we certainly saw both a demand for and ability to deliver on many more types of information products. So we could publish through many more channels. So an author now had to really sit back and think, well, if I'm preparing any unit of content, it's going to actually be experienced in many different ways. And much like we'll see with DITA in a second, we can prepare any one thing, and it may in fact be reused in many different types of publications, different user scenarios. Like it becomes much more complicated to know how content's going to be used. For publishers, we saw by adding all these new output channels that their systems became even more complex. So in part, moving to XML was supposed to give us greater simplicity, but because we suddenly became able to do more things, most of the time we wound up making even more complex systems. So we step back and say, well, what did we learn over those years? Well, for authors, we became, and at least my sense is we became more and more sensitive to the fact that how users will interact with content is important. And I push back against the insistence of some, even many, that formatting and how a user will encounter the content in an information product should be a completely afterthought, that we can focus purely on the content and forget about how it'll be rendered. I don't subscribe to that school. There's a good deal of academic research that indicates that in fact formatting cannot be completely separated away from how we prepare content. And an interesting concept that comes up is that if we isolate authors too far from how the information will be experienced and used, we run the risk of what's called rhetorical breakdown and rhetorical agency. And rhetorical agency is just a fancy word of saying I have a tactile, a physical, a personal sense for how this information is going to be used, so I'm going to write it almost with a clear picture of one or more types of users and what they're going to try to be doing. And this is it's not something that as communication professionals or as content technology practitioners we should just wave away and say this isn't really very important, because those decades of experience would indicate to me that they're in fact very important. And many of the people who are working authors, technical communicators, marketing communication specialists, for them it's not something that is something that they're comfortable giving up on or just handing off. Sometimes they're not even sure why they have been less than thrilled about many of the authoring experiences they've had with SGML and XML. But I suspect some of it comes back to this idea of the importance of rhetorical agency. For publishers and for the organizations paying the bills, probably the more important part of this problem, these persistent challenges, is that the publishing systems can become quite complex. They can become very difficult to manage. Making changes to them every year gets harder and harder. I have had many customers over the years who basically say, we just can't touch anything. If we touch anything, everything will break. And I had one customer who had such a complex publishing system, just to add a single little icon, it looked harmless. Just a single little icon to an online information portal cost over $1 million in introducing it. And I said, well, that's a pretty clear sign that you've done something really bad. So what it reminded us is that many of these environments have become isolated from mainstream technology infrastructure. They're outside of what your IT group will actually maintain. So they basically push it off to the side or force you to outsource it and say, we don't know how these things work. We don't know XML. We don't know publishing. We don't know DITA, whatever it is. And in many a large organization, that's one of the ceilings you run into, is you can't do bigger jobs because the information technology group has no appreciation for content problems, for content technologies, and therefore can't provide any help at all. Now here comes DITA. So as we enter the 2000s, so by mid 2000, by 2004 or 5, we have DITA becoming available, the Darwin Information Typing Architecture, and right from the first appearance, in my experience, when I started encountering, I guess it was 2004, I immediately recognized in DITA a couple of things, and it made me a fan and supporter of DITA from the very beginning. I said, first thing, I see a community. As IBM moved DITA into the public domain, immediately there was a community that formed, partly of communicators, partly of technology specialists, that said, this is a good place for us to sort of collect and collectively share and refine our best practices. What have we learned? So, and this is probably the simplest representation of DITA that you will have seen so far in DITA world. But it reminds us that that it's basically a good and proven idea. Some people might be surprised to learn that this architecture here of modular content topics being managed and then being assembled under using maps to basically reuse the content in many information products, and then to facilitate reuse within and across topics. This isn't new. We have it in other standards. We had it in preceding standards. We had already learned that you can solve a raft of problems in information management and publishing and cost control by using this approach. And what I immediately recognized in DITA was it was a distillation of many of the same lessons that in the defense sector that I had learned. I said, yeah, well, we do that too. And yes, we have to do that too. And okay, clearly the people in IBM were suffering the same things we were suffering in the defense sector, and there's no surprise there. So DITA basically had a lot of proven best practices. One time I was stopped in a park not far from my house by somebody whose company had just been acquired by IBM. And they stopped me in the park and said, Joe, what is DITA? And I just, because I was walking in the park and unprepared for such a question, I said, I look at DITA as a collection of dirty tricks that we all developed as a community starting in the years of SGML. And that we learn very quickly if we want to efficiently manage content where we're reusing it and publishing it in many ways. There's a certain number of things that you just have to do, or you're going to just pull your hair out. And DITA gives us those things. And as a consequence, DITA caught on very quickly. This was, again, an illustration I did, and again, from my perspective, DITA included a few things that were a bit special, although there were precedents. But what this illustration focuses on is the extensibility, saying, whether it's the topics, it's the type hierarchy, or domains, or maps, and hence any application behavior, I can approach things using a specialization framework. What does that mean? It says, well, I can have rules that apply at a general level, so default behavior that may be associated with a topic, but then I can associate some special behavior that I'd like to apply if it's a task as opposed to a concept. And if, say, I create a specialization of task, maybe I create a specialized task topic that's a test, for example. Maybe I have very, very specific formatting rules or other rules that I want to apply. The good thing about this approach is I can add a new behavior without breaking everything that's been there before. And in the defense sector, we had learned this same lesson that we had to manage the complexity of our publishing environment by using some form of specialization, so that we could add changes, we could add overrides, not throw everything out and start from scratch every time we wanted to do something different. So this did work. It was the only way to handle, we'll call it sophisticated enterprise class publishing in an environment where you were dealing with reuse, and where some of your publishing pipelines were targeting advanced digital products. In other words, you suddenly had a reason to have markup that was telling you about the data involved and not just about the formatting or the layout. So, DITA has a few architectural watchwords, and this sort of harkens back to my opening comments about let's think like architects for a minute. Open, modular, reusable, extensible. These are our key concepts with DITA. And DITA also comes along with an open toolkit, and I think in the next talk after mine, Elliot Kimber will be talking a bit about publishing using both FrameMaker and the Open Toolkit. But the Open Toolkit distills a lot of capability, and we'll see that has some value. Anyway, DITA, it's a community project. It's like a lot of people involved, and by itself, that's important. It distills many of those best practices, or as I call them, dirty tricks. It has very good industry support, and for many companies, it's the main thing that they're investing in with their products. And it can be extended. It can be adapted to address special requirements with an efficiency that we really didn't see very often before. So those persistent challenges, it gives us some good answers. It provides a shared set of solutions so we can move quickly to answers and not have to build everything from scratch, which can be a benefit for, say, the publisher and the organization paying the bills. The Open Toolkit, because it gives us a way to inexpensively experience how the content could be used, it can be used to help authors experience many different interactions with their content. So it can help us also reconnect authors to the information experiences. And this extensibility lets us do things like tighten up the markup to make it simpler for authors, or to tighten it up because we need more precise content because we're driving an application and not just printing a page. And here we have Buddy the Elf, super excited. And many of the vendors in the content management and the authoring and the publishing world were beside themselves with excitement when DITA came out. In fact, I remember a vendor coming to see me in 2004 demanding to know what her DITA experience was because they were just that excited about it. And of course, it was just entering the world of public visibility and discussion at that time. So it was kind of a funny question. But you could understand, vendors were excited because suddenly we had an opportunity to have a marketplace where most of the users might be actually using a single set of schemas and extensions to it. So doing similar things and doing it with similar markup. And that if you were a vendor of a CMS or an authoring tool or a publishing platform, you were super excited about the fact that your life might just get a bit simpler. But something, even with DITA, something is still missing. All those capabilities typically, 99% of the time are wrapped around the TechComm groups in organizations, which is not a bad thing because they have work they need to do, and they're working on user documentation or technical specifications supporting the product lifecycle, but not yet being leveraged outside of that, not being used for what we'll call mainstream communication tasks in the enterprise or for marketing. Like you will have heard some of the stories about why it's important to do so and why it has been done in some environments, but 99% of the time it's not yet crossed the chasm into those areas. On the technology side, the DITA stack of tools remain on the outside of the mainstream collection that is supported by the IT groups. So we need to find a way to get into that mainstream. So here's two case studies. One is a very large automobile manufacturer whose name will go nameless. Anyway, they had a problem. They had I call it the price of misalignment. They had marketing materials coming out of their Marcom group that wound up getting out of step, out of sync with the technical documentation, with the technical details about the piece of equipment, about the vehicle. And this led to a major problem, a court case, penalties. They were obligated to buy back a lot of the vehicles. It was just a bad day for this organization, or a bad year. And it showcased the importance of coordinating your marketing communication with the technical side. In that case, we looked at, well, how are we going to solve this problem? And this is probably 5 years. It was around the time actually Adobe first acquired the platform that became the Adobe Experience Manager. And it was I don't think it had yet been called the Experience Manager, but it was the Adobe Web Content Management Platform. I said, well, you have an enterprise license for this. What we could do is we could basically take some of your servers or create some of the servers and say, we use these to create and manage content assets. And that what we then do is create an experience not for customers yet, but for the designers, the creative teams, the people who are going to come in so that they can find content assets, because they had issues where they were constantly recreating the same video effectively. And it would be better if they could have an experience that made it easy, compelling, almost inescapable to know that materials already existed, and why not use this one, and then you can move on to create something new and special. And the creative teams were very keen. So basically we had two tiers of the experience manager. One that was sort of an inward-facing management system that said, I help create and manage good, high-quality content assets and make them available to creative teams who are, of course, under the pressure to say, you've got a campaign, and by next Tuesday morning, you better be ready to update all of our channels, because we're going into a sort of high-pressure sales mode. So it was a very good answer. We're now going to talk about a customer, a longtime customer of mine, the Canadian government. And yeah, I can probably get in trouble for this part. Anyway, over, say, 20 years now, more than 20, almost 25 years of investment in their digital presence, their digital services, it has been a study in disaster of poor quality. So the Canadian government has never shied away from spending money. We're probably well past a few $1 billion spent on our online services. We have never shied away from buying the very best tools and applying the best practices and bringing in the best consultants. But still, what's the end effect of all of this is worsening content. Every year it manages to get worse. So it's quite depressing. So in a variety of our projects now, we said, well, now, because the Canadian government has quite extensive licenses for the Adobe Experience Manager, we can say, now, if we can also use the documentation add-on, we can use a DITA CMS capability in conjunction with that. Suddenly now we can do as we did with that automobile manufacturer. We could say, let's separate the problems. Let's plan and design content assets one way, so whether they be guidelines or policies or procedures, strategies, whatever it is. And then we're going to put it in, stage it. We're going to make it easily accessible, and then they can drive it to various delivery channels. And they're trying to move to a single window for Canada.ca, where you can come in and whether you need to pay taxes or find out about your benefits, you can get a short path to where you need to go. And this, we have several projects where this is in fact our focus right now, and it is beyond exciting. After 20 years, I personally made some of the very first web pages for the Canadian government back in like 1993. And for me to see now that we, using DITA and the Experience Manager, that we can finally see improvement, not steady decline, is beyond exciting. So what does all this mean? Adding DITA support to an advanced web content management platform, and by their definition, web content management platforms are about the experience, about the information experience, about the user experience, and about monitoring and learning about what is happening. They are a connection to what people are trying to do. If we can connect our content activities to that, then we finally have a way to turn on, flick on the on switch for our content engagement activity, which in many organizations, even if they want to do it, they can't do it. But now, by adding our DITA support into the web content management platform, like the Experience Manager, suddenly all the lights come on, and user success, metrics, their feedback can come right back into our content strategy, into our content acquisition tasks to content creators. This changes basically everything. What I say here is that content solutions are therefore born. And that means, content solutions are basically when we use content and we use what's special about our ability as communicators to solve really big business problems. And that's where I'm going to wrap things up here. And I see we have a few minutes for a question or two or an objection, but hopefully I've conveyed my excitement in saying that finally, after decades, with all these pieces coming together, And given what I've sketched out as my belief of what makes content tick, we have good reason to be excited today.
Thank you so much, Joe Gollner. That was a quick ride and a lot of content to think about. So thank you very much for that. Thank you for being our guest today. And thanks to all the participants who dropped in for this session. We're a little bit short in time now because we start with the next session in 6 minutes, but maybe we have 1-2 minutes for some questions. Dustin, did you see some question that we should definitely answer now? Because I was a little bit busy with tweeting about the session, so I didn't really follow the chat.
I do see a question from Matthew. He mentions, is DITA the right tool no matter the scale of the company, the size of the knowledge base, etc.? Seems to work best as a tool for very large corporations with very large TechComm teams and demands. And he says for smaller companies, knowledge-based demands, it seems like a standalone tool has some serious benefits, something
Yes,
like
yeah,
RoboHelp.
I would definitely concur in some ways. Certainly we've had projects with organizations that are smaller and where we found that DITA provides us some benefits. I don't, however, just say DITA for the sake of DITA. It's always a matter of, what are the demands? Do you have a compelling need for what may only be possible if we take the step into DITA? Matthew's quite correct that there are lots of scenarios where a working tool like a RoboHelp will let you do a great deal, and it's not something we should ever denigrate. But what we do see is often, people start there and then they do grow, either as businesses or they are acquired or they start to collaborate with partners, and then suddenly they have to deliver an information experience that is a little different, a little more sophisticated, or a little bit different than what the tool that they're using, and that's what then pushes you across the line saying, now is the time to think about DITA. But I myself am not a standards lunatic that will only acknowledge the use of this or that standard. I've seen enough standards come or go that I'm exceedingly pragmatic.
Okay. Thank you very much again.